Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard and this is Lap of the World. You are currently watching what may be the most thorough review of a set of coilovers that exists on the internet. This is one corner from a set of KW Variant 3 dampers that we have run on our 92 NSX for the last 12 years and nearly 100,000 miles. First, we're going to briefly touch on what they've been through in that period of time, and then we aren't pulling any punches. We are going to talk about how they have held up physically, and then we're going to throw them on the dyno next to a brand new out-of-the-box KW Variant 3, and we're going to see how far out of spec the old one might be. After that, we're going to cover some of the subjective stuff like ride quality, performance, and finally, we will talk about some of the small design differences that you might see between a set of vintage KWs and something that you might get if you ordered some today. In full disclosure, this video is not sponsored by KW. Let's get started. Installed in August of 2010, these dampers have seen nearly 12 years and nearly 100,000 miles of use. These miles have included numerous trips across the country, covering as many as 8,500 miles over a single 15-day trip. That's of course on top of the something north of 8,000 track miles around 30 different circuits, ranging from super smooth Formula 1 grade tarmac to test tracks normally used for commercial vehicles, and in temperatures ranging from 25 degrees in snow to 115 degrees in the California interior. So it's safe to say we've put them through their paces. Now let's see how they've held up. For physical condition, we will start with the damper housings. KW touts their NX line stainless steel housings as having, quote, 100% corrosion resistance and an unlimited lifespan. Looking at these housings, I actually don't have any grounds to question those claims. Even the pistons, which aren't technically covered by that statement, show essentially no corrosion save for what could be some surface corrosion near the threading at the top, but that is probably really just staining from the actual corrosion of the upper bushing sleeve. Hoping the structural integrity cause is a clever bump stop design that incorporates a dust shield that covers the piston housing interface on the top side and has kept those areas shockingly clean considering the time and mileage involved. These spring perches and collars are a composite material with stainless steel reinforcement, and they also show no signs of degradation, and they still move on the threading, albeit with a little resistance, on even a completely unwashed housing. The right rear, aka the most abused corner of the car, did start to leak from the top adjustment point. I only noticed this after returning from our most recent track outing at PBIR. Had I done this over the winter as planned, they might have gotten a clean bill of health at that time. Leaks aside, on the list of things that have seen some degradation, the lower bushings are probably chief among those with respect to a point of actual concern. You can see here where the rubber has shrunk and started to crack a bit and draw away from the center bushing. These are still serviceable at this point, but I have seen other examples of KW Variant 3s where these have failed more significantly. The upper spring locator bushings, these rubber donuts that attach to the top hats, all showed signs of being compressed, but none were loose or otherwise compromised. A couple of the foam bump stops have split a little and when removed left some flakes behind, but they were still doing their job, so I would not cite this as a real point of concern. Separate from the dampers, but still part of the package from KW, I also wanted to touch on the springs. They aren't covered by KW's infinite corrosion resistance claims. Still, my springs only showed minor abrasion with only a couple of places on two of the coils where the bright yellow coating had been compromised. That said, spring length did come into question a bit. I noticed one of the two rear mainsprings was visibly shorter than any of the rest. Here it is next to its equally used sibling. The new springs are all the same length as the dirtier one pictured here, so I question whether this was a product defect or the spring actually losing height over the decade plus of use. Talking to our local suspension expert, it's expected for springs to lose a little rate over their lifespan even if they don't appear physically compromised, but springs losing height, while not unheard of, would be unusual. I'm not too worried as I'm replacing the rear springs, and the front mainsprings that I am reusing are significantly newer than the dampers, as I changed rates some years ago to mimic the NA2 Type R spring ratio, albeit softer overall. Now that we know how they've held up physically, let's throw a pair of old ones and a pair of new ones in the backup car and head over to Shorty's Shocks in Blount County, link in the description. Thanks for your help, Shorty. Where we can use his shock dyno to see how far out of spec these 12-year-old 100,000 mile KWs might be compared to some new ones. Diving right in and throwing the old shock on the dyno, Shorty ran a live graph as it came up to temperature to see what the damping profile looked like. I'm not enough of a shock expert to try and relate the science here, but the TLDR is that it was definitely still doing damper things that approximated its original settings. However, its profile did change as it got hot. I'm told this is on account of oil degradation or contamination. For those unfamiliar, the damping effect of a shock absorber is accomplished by forcing oil through various sizes of orifice. This means that the condition of the oil as well as the internal seals are paramount to a damper's function. In our case, where the new shock was pretty consistent in its damping through a full heat cycle, the old damper started out a little stiffer than this similarly set new damper, possibly on account of the oil degrading or having a higher cold viscosity, but ended up softer after it thinned out as the oil heated up. There may have been some other variables at play there, like seals bleeding through, that caused this, but the oil degradation is the standing expert opinion here. Speaking of expert opinions, I also asked Shorty for his unvarnished opinion on the new KWs after running them through a cycle. I told him he would absolutely not hurt my feelings if he had bad things to say. I'm not quoting him here, but I interpreted his response in so many words as being that they really weren't bad at all for an off-the-shelf shock at their price point. They were consistent, and the adjustments we did changed what they were supposed to. We didn't go through an entire testing suite on the new ones, other than to see that one pair that I brought were pretty close to each other. As for the old ones, we again confirmed that they were still doing damper things, although somewhat less consistently than they would when new. The last thing we'll talk about between the old and the new are some design changes and updates to the new versions that in my opinion address some shortfalls with the original. Although they are broadly identical, the compression or bump adjustments on the 2021 KWs are now done via a thumb wheel versus a pin arrangement on the circa 2010 versions. This adjuster is now more accessible from both sides for easier adjustment under the car, and each step of adjustment now has a positive tactile detent on both bump and rebound, where the old ones relied on sweeps that didn't give you a whole lot of feedback. Getting into some more subjective stuff here with respect to performance and ride, I'm no vehicle development driver or engineer, but I can at least speak anecdotally as a decent amateur driver with a reasonably calibrated butt dyno. I've done autocross at locally competitive level for years. One of the first things I did after putting the old set of KWs on in there originally was going to Chattanooga and scoring FTD, fastest time of the day, at a wet autocross against some reasonably stiff competition. Some of it was lucky tire choice given the weather, but the car was very predictable and not upset around bumpy corners on an empty auction lot. On track, they've always felt very sure-footed, and the car hasn't been upset by curbing or all but the gnarliest bumps or surface changes. Similarly, on road, they don't beat you up on anything but the worst surfaces. They definitely are not the magic carpet ride of a good condition stock NSX suspension, but they manage the body roll better, and I would rate them above stock Lamborghini suspension for comfort if you needed that extra data point. For one more point of reference, while my wife and I are still young at heart, we are not teenagers anymore, but have still been able to pull off 15-hour highway stints and arrive at our destinations not crippled. My overall summary of opinion of the KW Variant 3 as a coilover option for the NSX and many other applications is that after having gone over the old ones pretty thoroughly, tested them, and then put them at the mercy of a guy who builds race shocks, I don't regret buying the second set. I think if you're looking for a coilover that will give you good performance but also give you the option of a decent ride on the road and will last apparently quite a while between rebuilds, then I think KW makes a pretty strong value proposition at their roughly $2,800 circa 2021 price point with lower costs possible with occasional sales. Speaking of, this is not sponsored, but I'll give a shout out to Science of Speed from whom we bought our latest set. Their service was excellent as always. They also sell top hats if you don't want to reuse your originals. With our new set of KWs now installed, and if you want to watch that process, a link to that video should be appearing in the upper right hand corner. All that's left to do now is mail these old ones back to KW to be rebuilt, and take the new ones for a short test drive. 500 miles to St. Louis and back, or something like that. But those are both videos for another day. For now, thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, or at least entertaining, don't forget to drop a like for us below and consider subscribing. For now though, I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and we'll see you in the next video, if not at the track.